Hello, Saints. This weekend in our Revelation series, we're starting in on the trumpets. And we're going to be 2 weeks dealing with the trumpets and the background to it. And it starts off interesting with the background scene to the 7 trumpets. That begins in verse 2 of chapter 8 and goes in through verse 5. And he says, I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar, holding the golden censer, and much incense was given to him, that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer, and he filled it with the fire from off the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there followed peals of thunder, and sounds of flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. This is the introductory vision to the 7 trumpets. Each section of the book has the introductory vision. Like for the 7 churches, it's there in chapter 1, around verse 10 to 20. We get that picture of Christ in the first apartment of the sanctuary among the 7 golden candlesticks. We see him as deity, feet of bronze or feet of fire, eyes of fire, the sword coming out of his mouth for judgment or justice. This is the background scene to the 7 churches. And it ends with the censer being cast to the earth. That's close of probation language, but that's at the end of the 7 trumpets when probation closes. But in the meantime, with the coals of fire on the incense burner, sending smoke up into heaven, it's the prayers of the saints. And what that tells us is we're still in a time of intercession when we can reach out and be saved. This is not a judgment at the end. This is a judgment across the time of Christianity, from the time of the ascension until the return of Jesus. The 4 trumpets that we see here are usually looked at as the 4 different groups out of Rome that we read in Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith. This is the old historicist position, and that's not really a biblical exegetical position. They had not been official. And here we have something entirely different. When he talks about the first one sounding, the first trumpet goes out, there comes out hail and fire mixed with blood. And they were thrown to the earth, and 1/3 of the earth was burned up, 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Nowhere do you find literally 1/3 of the earth was burned up. Not in that first trumpet, according to the old interpretation. These are symbols. Remember, John is using the language of the past to write about the present and the future. And he's told in verse 1 to write in symbolism. What we have here in the picture of the trees and the grass are representing God's people. And there, 1/3 of them are burned up. And so what we have is a spiritual message that we need to understand from each trumpet. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. A mountain is usually representative of a kingdom or a nation. We see that in Daniel 2. And the great mountain at the end, the stone cut out by hand and without hand from the mountain, cast onto the statue, grew into a great mountain on earth and became the forever kingdom. That's the last one that we see. So what we see here is a continuation of a spiritual story that goes across time as Satan tries to destroy God's church. So spend some time with us if you can. Come to the meetings, and I'll even give you the outlines and stuff for the class. The 4th angel sounded, it says, and 1/3 of the sun, and 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars were smitten, so that 1/3 of them might be darkened, and the day might not shine, for 1/3 of it, and the night in the same way. We look at this and we think of the stars falling from heaven and the moon turning to blood. That's not these signs. This is a sign of darkness. And this is a sign of God's word being darkened. And right now we're in a time when they want to do that again. Just in the last 8 to 10 years, it seems that to be a Christian is much more of a challenge than it ever was in the past, than maybe we ever thought it would be in our own lifetime. So we are living in dangerous times. And we need to look at these as Satan's war against God's people. But these are just some of the first trumpets. And then he pauses there in verse 13. He says, and I looked, and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven. Another interpretation is he saw an angel flying in mid-heaven, crying out, "Woe, woe, woe," to those who dwell in the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpets of the three angels who are about to sound. Now there is kind of a parallel correlation to the three angels' messages of Revelation 14. But they're not exactly, but they are connected. And the last three woes are worse problems for the church than the first four. Now I want us to know that the judgments that are falling from the trumpets, these aren't natural catastrophes. But God is doing things in such a way to shake us up, directly intervening into the affairs of man to get us to acknowledge him. Kind of like 9/11. The church is filled up after 9/11. Now they quickly got over that. But God is using these things to draw our attention up and to call on him. Next time we're going to deal with the last three woes and take a look at that. Blessings.